Welcome to the Organic Wine Podcast. Hi, it's Adam. I wanted to give a contextual intro to the podcast today. It's a great interview with the owner of biodynamically certified J-Dirt Vineyards and Winery, Brook Williams. He gives some incredible insights into biodynamics as well as some great ideas about the economics of owning a vineyard and running one. But the reason I wanted to give this intro is because the time in which we're currently living is extraordinary. As I post today's episode, the entire western half of the United States has been under a constant smoke blanket for an entire month. Longer than that, if you count the fires that erupted across the nation in our cities in response to the blatant racial injustice that people of color have continued to face without notice until this May. And now my sister in upstate New York has just let me know that they're experiencing hazy air as the immense amount of smoke and ash from the western fires has made its way across the entire continent. All this against the backdrop of a global pandemic, so we have more than one reason to wear a mask at all times. The reasons I started this podcast have never seemed more relevant. Our connection to the earth and to each other is being thrown or blown in our face. And yet, I'm not crazy about the news coverage. There is a constant sensationalizing and overhyping of every negative detail, clearly motivated by the need to keep viewers watching rather than give a rational, big-picture analysis. This coverage emotionalizes us, it scares us and angers us, and the result is that we feel powerless to do anything but keep watching the news, looking for someone or something to blame, and reposting. The truth is that each of us has more power than we think. Yet the most important power we have is the one we seem to be most reluctant to use. That's the power we have over ourselves. We have the power to look closely at the beliefs and values we hold and the choices we make and to change them for the better. We become so overwhelmed by the scale of the negativity that we see this year that we may think our little individual choices don't matter. Our choices of where we shop, what we consume, or whether we vote. But all of those little individual choices by each of us, multiplied by the hundreds of choices we make every day and compounded over thousands of days, literally create the world we live in. There is a lot more positivity and hope than the news would lead you to believe as well. I encourage everyone to take the time to seek it out. Spend at least as much time researching inspiring, brilliant, solution-bringing projects and work being done by amazing people as you do watching the news. My goal is to share some of that positivity with this podcast. Please don't lose hope. Don't let despair disempower you. Hey, I'm just a guy who loves wine and nature and people, and who thinks it's redundant to say that because they're really all the same thing, connected inextricably. But let me quote author Min-Jin Lee, who says it a lot better than I can. She says, "History has failed us, but no matter," serves as my thesis statement. I believe history has failed almost everybody who is ordinary in the world. It is not that historians aren't doing their jobs, but rather that the memory of history has been reconstructed by the elite, because the overwhelming majority of ordinary people rarely leave sufficient primary documents. They do not have others recording their lives in real time. The phrase, "but no matter," is a statement of defiance. It doesn't matter that history has failed us because ordinary people have persisted anyway. This idea gives me an enormous amount of strength and hope as a writer because I am an ordinary person. Those of us who may be women of color, immigrants, or working class aren't often meant to be people who write novels about ideas, but no matter. As always, thanks for listening and enjoy this episode with Brook Williams of J-Dirt Vineyards and Winery. First, let me just welcome you to the Organic Wine Podcast. Thanks for doing this, Brook.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
And tell me about what you do with wine.
I don't do a lot with it. That's the beauty of organic and biodynamic winemaking is you don't have a lot of things that you don't have a large toolbox, as it were, to manipulate or change the wine. A lot of what that comes from organic and biodynamic winemaking is done in the vineyard. You have to have really good product picked at the right time because you can't make all those adjustments at the winery. It's basically too late, which then, as a primarily a grower or a wine grape grower that I am, it better reflects the site, which why we're here and trying to validate my existence as a grower, and the uniqueness that is my site.
So tell me about, I guess, your winery and your sites.
The wineries is my friends, well, actually friends, and one of my customers' wineries that we use. I have a small little space that within that winery. The sites I have three, or my family and I own three different winery or vineyards. Two of them are right next to each other here in outside of Lompoc, in close to the Santa Rita Hills. We're actually west of Santa Rita Hills. One is a traditional vineyard that was planted in 2000, mostly to Pinot Noir, but a little Chardonnay, and it's called Duverita. Recently, we bought the neighboring property and planted over there. We're along the Highway 246 corridor, very sandy soils, and we planted a vineyard that was modeled to be low inputs. So I went back and found a bunch of old viticulture books here in California from the late 1800s and early 1900s and read those, and it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. We implemented those techniques, which are some own-rooted vines, head pruned, wider spacing. We hope to at some point get to dry farming. We're not there
Wow.
yet because the vines are still pretty young. And that vineyard's called Christian Wise. And then we have another vineyard up in Edna Valley, which is up near San Luis Obispo. And it is about 40 acres, and it was planted as a biodynamic vineyard originally back in '06. We bought it it was Bob and Louisa Lindquist's vineyard, who own, or we're Coupe. And then, so we bought it in 2013, have been running it ever since. And that's mostly Syrah. It's called Slide Hill. And all of the vineyards now are biodynamic certified vineyard.
Got it. And the name of your winery is J Dirt, right?
Yeah, J Dirt is,
And that's sort of your alter ego, right?
yeah, it developed as a nickname, my daughter's nickname for me when she was in high school. And as I was the chef, and well, not chef, but I was the cook at home and the chauffeur. And then when she went off to college, she goes, "Oh, Dad, you need a street name, something cooler than just James as the butler." So she got J Dirt.
That's great. Um, well, thank you for introducing your vineyards and everything. Let me just take a step back, and I think you have a bit of an unusual entree into being a wine grower, and I'd love to have you explain what your background is and how you got into this whole thing.
Yeah, my original education was as an accountant and a CPA, so I got my CPA license, and then got an accounting job. Actually, before I got into the wine business, I was the controller at Heavenly Valley Ski Resort back in the '80s, which was fun. Up
Oh,
in
nice.
Tahoe, met my wife there, and then we got into the wine business because I liked to drink wine, and I was an accountant, one of three accountants back in the late '80s at Gallo Winery in Modesto.
Hmm.
Um, so did a lot of things for them, did their taxes, did mergers and acquisitions, did financial analysis. I went to MBA, or they sent me to MBA school. They moved me to marketing, spent 4 years doing marketing for them, a lot of it international marketing. And then I did some sparkling wine marketing for them domestically. Then went up into Napa, worked for Beringer Wine Estates at the time. Did the marketing for them on the Beringer brand. It was pretty exciting. Then had a short stint with South Corp at the time, this was before the merger with Rosemont and before the merger back Behringer. It was Penfolds and Lindemans basically as the VP of marketing for the Americas for South Corp. And then that was kind of a weird transition. They merged, management changed, and it's like, I'm out of here. And went on to Kendall Jackson, and I was the VP of marketing for Kendall Jackson for a couple of years. Then moved. Thought I wanted something different. Wanted to get off the corporate wine world, and I got moved down to the Central Coast and became the CEO at Zaca Mesa Wine, where I spent 9 years doing that, which was great because it was an estate-bound winery, and I love Syrah, so that kind of worked out well. And
Nice.
then
Yeah.
had an investment opportunity, and one of the vineyards looked interesting, and decided to start my retirement with buying a vineyard, my retirement project.
And
And one
becoming,
vineyard led to another vineyard, which then led to another vineyard. So, but I think with 3 vineyards, I think my retirement project is pretty full at this point.
yeah, you retired to more work and longer hours, right?
Yes, but at least it is very fulfilling and very
Yeah.
satisfying, having your own projects to work on. And farming is such a long-term project that it's kind of, and it's fun. And it's challenging because every day's a new day. And just because it happened, yesterday, it's going to be slightly different today. So
Mm.
it's always something new.
Yeah, that's what I like about it as well. And everything that you've talked about, I have a couple questions for you. You have an accounting background, and so you surely your eyes are open about the economic realities of the wine business, and yet you decided to go into it. Did what it was? How did you justify that to your accountant brain?
It The way I see it is the vineyards are almost like on the financial side are almost like a rental house where you can depreciate the vineyards and you have potentially a positive cash flow with very low taxable income.
Mhm.
So we bought real estate, which I think is strategically placed in good places, and which just happened to have vineyards on top of them, which I love vineyards and I'm passionate about growing grapes, which then generates, hopefully a small positive cash flow and very little taxable income. So it makes a nice, and hopefully you have the real estate appreciates over time.
Right.
So that's my rationalization, my accounting hat in the
That's
business.
actually, yeah, that's actually really useful, I think, and helpful information for anybody that's thinking about it. It's there is a smart way to do it, even if it's a dream or something that somebody has, like me, for example, of owning a vineyard. I think being able to think of it the way you just described is very helpful, because it is a tough business otherwise. The
Absolutely.
other question, yeah, the other question I had after you saying that was, you know, you worked in a lot of essentially conventional large wineries, and yet you came to biodynamics. Why was that? Like, what turned you on to biodynamics? You mentioned those books that you read, but what specifically? What I mean, I would love to hear what those books were, but what specifically in the ideas that you were learning about turned you on to biodynamics, despite your background?
Well, the I looked at it a little bit when I was at Zaca Mesa, and it really became a cost benefit analysis at that point, and I didn't understand enough about it. When we bought the Slide Hill Vineyard in Edna Valley, it was already certified biodynamic, and it's like, all right, let's see what this is about. And there's not a lot of certified biodynamic vineyards in the area, maybe a
Right.
handful. So I saw it as, okay, well, let's give it a shot. I don't know if I understand all of what it is, but it does make me or this vineyard relatively unique. So read into it, and some of it is I'm still either I don't understand or I don't care to understand. But the more I learn about it, the better it feels, and it just feels like you're instead of combating Mother Nature with sprays and trying to conquer her into your will, you work with Mother Nature and the things she provides, like compost, and there's a lot of medicinal, plants out there that can help you with nutrients and specific remedies that you may need in the vineyard. and you work with her instead of working against her. And it seems to be much more efficient, very cost effective, and it kind of works. It's kind of fun to learn. Kind of, it's almost traditional farming, because the old timers, they couldn't afford it, or they didn't have resources that we do now with all these synthetic chemicals and applications that you have. And it's funny too, is probably the guys with the richest or the biggest trucks are the ones that are usually selling stuff to farmers, not the farmers themselves. I always found that interesting.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. Um, so what do you know about biodynamics now? I mean, what is it? What is it? And I guess we'll give you the opportunity to distinguish it from organic, for example.
So yeah, to biodynamics is step one is being organic. So, and my best analogy or simplest way to start this is like for us as humans, eating well or organically would be basically the baseline of being organic in the vineyard as well. So you're feeding it correctly with no synthetic elements and that. Biodynamics takes it to the next level where us as humans would be like, well, not only are you eating right, but you're also going to the gym and working out and being healthy that way. So you're making things stronger in biodynamics. You're trying to make the plants stronger, make the soil stronger, which then increases your resiliency, which also reduces your demand for water and other inputs. You've created a balanced ecosystem because nobody's out of place, and you don't have as many then outbreaks because there's always a prey and predator relationship. You haven't killed all the predators of a certain class of within the ecosystem, so it doesn't break down. It continues to roll, and then nothing raises its ugly head disease wise or pest wise that isn't come into balance again. So biodynamics then also I was kind of it has a lot of astronomy to it to some extent, or
Going to get into that.
yeah.
I feel like it gets dismissed sometimes because of what would be claims of non-scientific elements to it. How do you
Yeah,
feel about those elements?
I'm not there all the way, but I am definitely, the more I learn about it, is the moon is more important than we think. Well, you think about, plants and humans, we're about 60-70% water. And if the moon can move tides, which are
Mhm.
large bodies of water, why doesn't it have an impact on us and
Right.
plants? So I am learning to do certain things during certain moon phases, which
Well,
so far seem to be working. And it
okay.
actually puts you on a rhythm because the moon is every 28 days, and it gets you into a nice cycle of, every 2 weeks you irrigate, or every 2 weeks you spray. And it's kind of a natural cycle for us and in the vineyard to be working. So that's kind of fun. I haven't got to all the celestial, Saturn's in going, what is it? Mercury's in retrograde right now. And it's like, well, what's that mean? And I haven't got, all the different constellations and that kind of thing figured out, and how it does it impact us for vineyards as well. So, for 20-year-old plants or, perennial plants, that's permanent plants that are here, the planting calendar, or these 4 days or this or that, are not as important as if you're planting lettuce, where you have a 90-day cycle lifespan of the lettuce. And
Right.
if you don't plant it on the right day, you're going to be fighting. You're going to be off by 5 days, which
Right.
could be a problem. But in a vineyard, it's not as big a deal, so it's not as important as other crops maybe.
Is there any aspect of the vineyard work that you think is most affected, that most sensitive to those cycles? Like you want to, whether it's, I don't know, pruning or picking, harvest, is there any aspect of it that you think actually, if I'm going to err on the side of biodynamics, this is the moment that I would do it.
Right now, we try to coordinate pruning. So that is during the descending moon. So after the full moon, as it goes into new, where supposedly there's more pull to of the moon to into the earth. So then, when we do prune the vines, we're not pruning a lot of the sap basically out of the vine because the sap is more into the roots at that point.
Right.
So that's kind of the theory behind that. We have a vineyard that I prune with two other guys. It's 30 acres and it takes us 3 months. So that's not really possible to do only, during only prune during the descending moon. You still have to prune the vines when they're dormant.
Right.
And I don't trust other people to prune that vineyard at this point because they've proven they don't know exactly everything I want done or pruned correctly. So that's kind of our issue. You still have to be a good farmer in spite of the moon cycles. You still have to
Right.
get stuff done.
Right.
But we have been doing also irrigating during the half moons, and that seems to be working. I think harvest is also can be on the right. Should be on. There's a series of they have the leaf day, the root day. I'm not sure
The
how they
fruit
do
day, the
determine
flower
all that
day.
stuff,
Yeah.
but I try to harvest on the fruit days.
Right.
But sometimes the winery can't always accept it and logistically do that, or I can't. If everybody wants to prune on the same day or pick on the same day, I can't do that. I physically can't get that much fruit off the vine at the same day. So we try to move things around. Plus, if there's like a heat wave or something, that we try not to pick during the heat waves. Um,
Right.
so you still have to be a good farmer, and then
Do
ideally it works with the moon cycles, but sometimes you still have to do what you got to do.
I'm getting pretty deep into the weeds here, but this question just occurred to me. I know a lot of picking happens in California at night. So when does a moon day begin and end? Like if you're, do you know what I mean? Like if you're picking at 2 a.m., are you on the previous day's moon day or the following day's moon day?
Well, it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
It's like windows based on not only the moon but all the other planets as well. Is how
Okay.
they determine fruit days and root days and those kinds.
Got
I
it.
use a calendar. I can't figure it out myself, so I buy a biodynamic calendar, and that helps me when it comes to harvest. There's also
Yeah, I know.
times that they talk about if you're racking wine and stuff like that, you could also integrate. If you do a fruit day or a yeah, if you rack on a fruit day, then you're kind of letting all your aromatics out, supposedly. So you might want to consider racking on a root day where things are kind of
Interesting.
tight, more tight, so you're not letting those aromatics out, supposedly. Whether that's scientifically true or not, I'm not sure, but is it worth trying? Absolutely.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have absolutely heard stories of people who did just, sort of layperson tests of tasting wines on the various days and over, a series of months or whatever, and did come back and say, they enjoyed the wine better on fruit days. Like it was, they're like, they were sort of stumped because they went in skeptically and kind of in an effort to disprove it, but they were like, I don't know if it's coincidence, but we did prefer the wines on fruit days. So there's more and more stories like that. The more I feel like the wider biodynamics gets out into the world. And just going back to the full moon or the moon and its influence. I mean, I live in South Central Los Angeles, and definitely on a full moon, I hear a lot more sirens and helicopters. And that's just anecdotal, but it does seem like it has an effect on.
Yeah,
Um,
I find it fascinating how words have developed, and like lunatic and luna
yes, yeah.
is the moon. So yeah, the full moon would make people a little edgy, maybe.
And have you ever done any other kind of viticulture? I mean, it sounds like you bought a biodynamic vineyard from the get go. So obviously you oversaw, you know,
At Zaca Mesa, we grew anywhere from 150 to 180 acres,
right.
more sustainably conventional. We were using Roundup, but otherwise mostly organic fungicides and things like that. So softer fungicides as best we could.
Did
But it wasn't
you?
organic by any. We didn't certified anything.
I mean, do you have any evidence or even anecdotal thoughts about the comparison having gone from Zaca Mesa to your own biodynamic vineyards and differences, in terms of improvements, I guess, is what I would be interested in, but also anything else too, if things got worse in any way.
I guess anecdotally, the best description I've heard about that is from Steve Beckman, who's
Yeah.
in our area, and he grows biodynamically, and has for several years or multiple years. And it's like taste wise and health wise, it's biodynamics is just different. It just tastes different. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And I think I like wines. I like drinking wines that have character or have a soul to them. And I think a lot of the conventional farmed wines have some of their soul ripped out and
Hmm.
don't show that character. And soul could always be, it just you can tell and you cannot tell it. So it's hard to describe, but it just has an energy or a soul to them, and that's the wines I like to drink.
Are you certified? Is the winery certified, or
Yes,
just the vineyards? The winery is also certified biodynamic.
correct.
So how does that affect winemaking? I mean, I think we can get a sense of viticulture and what the viticultural practices, but what about in the winery? What do you have to do or not do?
The main constraints is you're not allowed to adjust sugar levels or acid levels in the winery.
Okay,
So once you pick, so you got to pick on the right days so that
right.
I mean, a lot of times in California, you're not allowed to add sugar, but you are allowed to add acid and other additives. So that's an issue. And then, or so you don't have that toolbox. And
Right.
then you also can only add up to 100 parts per million of SO2.
So you have to be
And
strategic about your additions if you're going to add any.
exactly. And you're not allowed to add any commercial yeasts. You're not
Got it. So it's
allowed
all
to.
all native indigenous fermentation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Let's see what else is
And
you
I
can
think
do a little cross flow filter.
okay,
Fining has to be done with organic eggs, but no other elements.
can't use
They they say you can still use bentonite, but I'm not a big fan of that. Exactly. But basically, the concept is to reflect the site. Oh, and no new oak, no
oh,
oak,
no new
new oak barrels.
oh that
Yeah. So we use a lot. I mean, 7 to 10 year old barrels. I mean, the concept is that you in biodynamic winemaking is to reflect the sense of place, the site. So I think that's where no new oak and not a lot of manipulation and native yeasts and don't adjust acid and sugar, all those things come from.
on your website you use the term regenerative, and does that go above and beyond biodynamics? How do you use that term?
Regenerative ag is, yeah, it is becoming more of a force. Biodynamics includes a lot of it, but it doesn't. I've gone to a couple regenerative classes and ag classes, and it's like, oh, okay, a lot more focus on soil health than a lot of the biodynamic guidelines provide. So I kind of go the next level on soil health, biodiversity, those kinds of fun things. So it's
Uh-huh.
been been interesting. I mean, they talk, biodiversity. One of the things is most of the people, even in biodynamics, it's like, well, what's your cover crop blend? And it's like these two things, and it's like, no, I want like 6 to 8 different species in my cover crop because that provides you diversity and multiple diverse fuel or food sources for your biology in your soil. And I know some people traditionally, like it when we were at Zaca Mesa, I'd plant grass in, a triticale or some grass species in one row and then alternate with a langum row, which would be bell beans and peas or something like that. And it's like,
Hmm.
well, your bacteria may not like the grass in one row. So you're just basically killed off. So you basically you're almost creating monocultures of your biology. But in nature, monocultures don't exist. They're not resilient. So that's why you need the diversity to provide a diverse food source and habitat for multiple types of bugs and biology, fungi, and all those kinds of fun things. So that's what, to me, the regenerative part is more feeding the ecosystem and providing diversity, improving soil health, which
Right.
goes above and beyond the standards of biodynamics. It works into the biodynamic standards, but they're not as required and they're not as detailed as, because farming's hard.
Yeah. Well, and that was going to be my question. There are things that are required to be biodynamic certified, and then it sounds like you're also doing some things above and beyond what's required, like cover cropping. I take is not required.
It's
Um,
encouraged. Yeah.
and what about no till, or are you tilling or
Exactly, and we've reduced our tillage a ton, and granted,
yeah,
we have some weeds, and weeds are fine. Weeds are your friend. So we're, yeah, reducing tillage is a big part of it, and so we don't disc. I'm basically selling my discs. We do have
wow.
some chisels and things like that that are just open the dirt. They don't turn the dirt or anything like that.
Hmm.
They're more for killing gophers than anything else.
Right.
And then, yeah, we don't do any under vine tillage. I've been buying weed whackers instead and just using that to trim the weeds underneath the vines.
Right.
Looking at more permanent or perennial cover crops that you can just, that will choke out a lot of the weeds. So we're transitioning from that or transitioning to more perennials that come up every year and will choke out the
Mhm.
weeds. But in the meantime, we have weeds.
Well, speaking of gophers, when I visited, you pointed out your raptor nesting boxes. I think is that your only method of controlling the gophers from a biodynamic standpoint, like a holistic approach like that?
That and we do. Oh, I mean, I have basically almost a full time guy here doing gopher trapping.
Okay, got
Um,
it.
we also have. I know I don't fill in any of the holes underneath the deer fence where the coyotes come in, the bobcats come in, and
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
that kind of thing. We encourage. We got garter
Can
snakes, we got gopher snakes running all over the place. So we, and that's kind of, but with predators you also have, or with prey you have predators. So that's the best we can do
right.
at this point. We do, yeah, owl boxes. You encourage that, and I think by not tilling as much, the snakes are here. You also provide, I mean, the downside is you provide more habitat and cover for gophers and voles and things like that. So you
Right.
gotta, that's probably the biggest downside. But they're also good soil conditioners. So if you think about, gophers actually turn the soil in the top, foot and a half of the soil. They aerate it. So they're not all bad as long as they don't eat your roots or the roots you
Right.
want. And that's some of the reasons that we have some of these big old mustard plants here, and they got a nice taproot that's nice and juicy that the gophers can chew on instead of, well, hopefully they get distracted from the vines. They have other things to eat now besides the vine roots. So
I
hopefully
love
that's
that.
working too. But I'll tell you in a couple of years.
um, I love that sort of balance that the idea is what I'm hearing is striving for a natural balance of things to take care of themselves ultimately, less input from you and a more natural, like you said, working with Mother Nature. um, I
Exactly.
have you, do you think that works in any vineyard situation? And maybe I'd follow that question up with, what kind of person do you need to be to make to be successful in biodynamic viticulture?
You need to be patient, and a lot of you have to get over the hump that it looks pretty. We have this concept of, some of the super manicured vineyards where everything's in, tucked up nicely and everything's hedged and that kind of thing. You have to accept the mess a little bit.
Right.
And most of my buyers get it. And
Yeah.
they don't have to have, a vineyard is not an English garden where everything is perfectly laid out. Nature doesn't work that way. And for nature to work, it has to be a little wild. So I think that's the biggest hurdle. a lot of people have. It's like, oh, it's pretty. And I know I look back and I'm tucking shoots or whatever, and it's like, wow, look, it looks so pretty right now. Or, when all the weeds are gone and it's like, oh, it looks pretty. And it's like, yeah, but the weeds will be back
Right.
real soon.
Right. But enjoy it while it lasts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Um, Now, the Duvarita vineyard has a unique, the vines are trained in a unique way. Can you talk a little bit about that and why they are like that?
There's probably multiple reasons. Just to start with, our spacing is 7-foot rows and then 3 feet between vines within the rows. So they're relatively tight spacing that gets you almost 2,100 vines an acre. We're in a cool site that's relatively windy, and the soil is very sandy. Sand has a lot of air in it. It drains very well, which is why vines like it.
Right.
Air provides fuel for a lot of the biology to eat lots of fun things down below. So we continue to feed the fun things down below. The vines are pruned in what they call a double guillot fashion. And guillot is a French name or a French surname for the guy that started this technique, which is basically it's a trunk with two short canes coming off each side. And the canes are just 1-year-old wood. And then what the theory is, you have less cuts onto the trunk or to the head of the vine, less places, less wounds, less infection or points of infection for bacteria and diseases to get into your vine. They're also relatively low to the ground.
Very low. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
exactly. We're about 18 inches. The top of the head of the vines are about 18 inches off the ground.
yeah.
Part of that is to get out of the wind as best we can, and then also to get a lot of the radiant heat off the floor of the vineyard. So you
Because
get,
it is cool. I mean, it's remarkable to think that you're west of the Santa Rita Hills, which I think most people know of as, the westernmost AVA, closest, heading out to the ocean. But then you're beyond that. So and I
yeah.
remember as we were standing there in full sun, I was getting chilly just from the breeze, just a constant, chilly breeze coming straight off the ocean.
Yeah, and the Pacific Ocean is really cold right there too at that
Yeah.
point before it turns into like Santa Barbara where you have the South Coast. So we get a cold ocean. The breeze, we have east-west valleys, so the ocean is unobstructed, or the ocean breeze is unobstructed on the way here.
Right.
And we're about 10 miles from the ocean, and yeah, the sun is warm, but the breeze is cool. We've had a handful of days over 80 degrees so far this year, and in mid-July. So
Right.
I had maybe 2 days that hit 90 degrees so far.
How are your grapes doing there in that vineyard? What stage are they in?
We are getting to what they call cluster closure. So
Oh,
they're swelling up, and I've seen one bunch that have started to change color on the Pinot Noir.
oh
Uh,
wow.
so we're probably verations a week to two away. Typically here we get Pinot starts to change color mid to late July.
I
Syrah,
have
we have a little Syrah at the top of the hill, which will start going through verasion in mid to late August.
just
So
just a fun little thing. We have a little front yard vineyard. We have Syrah vines that are completely through veraison already here. And then I have some Pinot in the backyard that are just starting. And it's like, do you guys, I don't know if it's the microclimates difference between the front yard and the backyard or what, but it completely flips what you'd expect on its
yeah,
head in
yeah,
terms of,
we pick Pinot we pick Syrah like a month to 6 weeks after we finish with Pinot Noir here.
right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's normal. I don't know what's wrong with me here, but Southern California, I don't know.
Yeah,
Los
it could be
Angeles, Los
exposure.
Angeles. Yeah, could be too. I mean, it's interesting, but um, the other thing, one other thing I wanted to bring up. Are we doing okay for time? I just want to check in with you. Do you need
Yeah,
to? Okay, great. Just a couple more questions. Um, One of the things that I noticed on your website was you mentioned sustainability, and I know that that word is used in a lot of ways that makes it meaningless, but there is also a sustainable certification. There are things that make it a lot more meaningful in terms of business practices. And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about how you guys are operating sustainably. And I'd love you to talk about what that means for the vineyard worker treatment and their, any benefits that they receive or any, just the way that it impacts the people who actually work with the grapes.
Yeah, sustainable. First off, we're not certified sustainable.
Okay.
I haven't gone there yet. I got the biodynamic certification. Seems to be daunting enough.
Would
um,
you recommend it to anybody? I mean, would you recommend biodynamic?
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Great.
I think once you get the theory, I think it's kind of interesting to do. When comes back to sustainability, I read a great quote is, well, if our current system's broken, why do we want to sustain it?
That is
So
great.
that gets me to the more regenerative side of things when at least when it comes to agriculture. Part of the sustainability certification requires a look at how you do business as well as what you do. So
Right.
that's where the employees, you talked about employees and their benefits, those kinds of fun things. I have two employees, and then our labor force is complemented by contract labor force as well to do
Right.
a lot of the heavy lifting and that kind of. But my two guys, I'm working on actually providing them health benefits. Actually, starting this year, working on that. Working on a 401k plan for them as well. Even though I only have two employees, so none of that is required until you hit like 25 employees or 5 employees, depending on what you're talking about and the size of the companies and all those kinds of fun things. So we
Right.
are trying to provide them better resources, and a lot of them. I mean, they're a couple college grads, which are great, but they need a career path as well, and they need to make sure that they do, they provide for themselves and take care of themselves. So that we
Right.
encourage to do that. Encourage education as well. One of my guys has gotten his PCA license, so that's great. Helps out a lot. So yeah, we encourage our employees to continue to ask questions, and they're a team. So I try to treat them as best I can.
So I just want to go into, I guess, the closing questions, we'll call them. What big ideas are you wrestling with these days? Like, what's been fascinating you, and what have you been geeking out about? And
Yeah, I've been reading a lot about just the soil health. I'm reading a book now about carbon farming and how do you carbon is it's free, but it provides a wealth for plants and your land. So it's this thing called green plants create carbohydrates from the sun and free. And
right,
it kills me that my neighbor has his field bare for 6 months out of the year. Meanwhile, he's driving a tractor, keeping the weeds down um, during that 6 months. And it's like you don't get it. You don't get where photosynthesis creates carbon and sticks it in the ground. And why not use that? And some of it is too is as a vineyard owner, the vines are green, yes, but then you have all your rows, barren, and it's like, well, why would you do that? Um, we have opportunities to sequester tons of carbon and provide, and that carbon, those carbohydrates, provide food for the biology and which bacterium and fungi in your soil, which then feed the plants. And you can't just, I
right.
mean, what people forget, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. And that's the thing that I've been geeking out is about the biology, protecting the biology and the fungi, and then that requires them to have food. Food requires photosynthesis, and the mystery of nature continues.
Have you looked into buying carbon credits, or trying to get carbon neutral, so you can say that the winery or the vineyards are carbon neutral or anything like that?
I have not. No,
Okay,
I know
just
there's.
curious.
I mean, and I'm one of those where I'm going to do the right thing no matter what. And a lot of people send me, oh, you should apply for this grant or that grant, and it's like, you know what? I don't take handouts. I don't do that. One, I don't want to do the paperwork for it to start with,
Right.
and if
Busy
I'm,
enough.
yeah, and I want to be out in the field. I don't want to be doing paperwork.
Right.
So I think I do the right thing the first time, or try to at least. And some of the grants, oh, what new steps have you done? And it's like, well, I do them anyways. So why, let somebody else take the money? I don't know. I I'll do it and figure out a cheap way to do it, or an inexpensive way, or a way that has a high return on investment, and figure it out myself.
There's a couple books that you've talked about. Can you give names of books or any other resources that have been, inspiration, education, great resources for you in terms of getting to where you are with biodynamics?
Yeah, this sequence started where I went to the biodynamic wine seminar or conference, San Francisco, probably 2, 3 years ago now. And I heard a guy speak, David Montgomery, which was he's a geologist.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep. I was just listening to a podcast with him this morning. He
and
wrote
dirt. Yeah,
Dirt
the
or the movie
erosion of
Dirt.
civilization, right? What is it? Yeah, it's Dirt, the erosion of civilization. So that got me going. And then I read all his other books. He's got two other ones. One he co-wrote with his wife, The Hidden Half of Nature, and then the other, Regenerative Ag. And
Great.
then from there, I read Gabe Brown's book that came out, I think, last fall, maybe 2 falls ago now, Dirt to Soil. And that's that was a great book, and that got me into the more of the regenerative ag side of things.
Uh-huh.
And now I'm reading carbon farming, and a bunch of other things too. I couldn't remember all of them. Oh, what scared the hell out of me too was if Cadillac Desert. Have you read that about
No.
California water? It's about 20 years old book, but I think it's still applicable today. There's also The West Without Water, which is kind of the continuation of the Cadillac Desert, dealing with just your water resources here on the West, and more of a historical preference or long term climate forecasting, which I thought was kind of
Yeah.
scary and cool at the same time.
Yeah. So since you brought it up, maybe this will be a good closing thing. What do you see as the future, especially of viticulture in California, especially the Central Coast there? I mean, I know we just came out of a pretty long and severe drought. What what are your thoughts about looking ahead, and if more of that comes, and are you optimistic? How do you think we'll need to adapt our viticulture, and where do you see us headed?
Yeah, I I think there's a couple of different factors going. Well, there's three big factors going on. One is, yeah, resources are going to become constrained, both water and labor. Those are also the two most expensive things we probably have here in the state to deal with. And that's why I planted the vineyard next door to Duvarita in more of that low input method, because I want that vineyard to last 100 years,
Right.
not be a burden to my kids or my next generation that takes it over. So that's kind of where we went back to the future kind of thing, is look back to when there wasn't a lot of labor, wasn't a lot of synthetic chemicals, there wasn't a lot of tractors work, and petroleum based power, so that you can try to farm with low inputs. The other thing going on, especially in our location, the climate change, and
Right.
we are on the coast, and I think we will get more wind, and we will
Right.
end up being, I think, colder as the interior of California becomes hotter. More wind, so hot air rises, uh,
Pulls the air.
pulls the air in from the coast. So we're going to get windier. So I planted varieties that are more wind tolerant and drought tolerant, because of that in certain
Right.
locations. Even though most people would say, "Oh, you'll never ripen that up in your climate," but it's like, well, you know, I planted right next to Santa Rita Hills, which is supposedly Pinot Noir country. I planted some Pinot and I put Syrah right next to it. The Syrah's doing well. Grenache is doing well there too, but the Pinot is getting beat to crap because of the wind. And it's
Yeah.
like, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would you plant more Pinot here?
Right.
So it doesn't do well. So I'm planting their own varieties, and so that's kind of the factors I'm seeing. And even here with a 20-year-old vineyard here at Duvarita with a lot of Pinot on it, you've got to we've got windbreaks up that have been planted 20 years ago, so they're protecting the Pinot. There's a lot of extra things you have to do to plant Pinot Noir and for it to survive.
I imagine, like east facing slopes where it's protected from the west by the brunt of the wind might be a good thing as well.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Well, Brooke, thanks so much for doing this. How can people get in touch with you or find out more about J Dirt and what's going on with what you're doing?
Conveniently, we have a website that you mentioned a couple times, jdirtwines.com, and it has
Great.
all the vineyards there, and they can, we do give vineyard tours, get people out in fresh air, at a social distancing, of course, and with masks and all those kinds of fun things.
I took one of those tours. I can highly recommend it.
So that's all fun. And then keep reading books, and there's lots of regenerative ag books out there, and I think the one of the big pieces of advice is just because somebody does it doesn't mean it's right. Or
That's
somebody tells
great.
you, it's a conventional thinking, like, oh, we did it last year, do it again. It's like, no, don't do it again.
Que-
Figure out
question
why.
everything.
Exactly.
That's great. Well, thank you again. It's been great talking to you. I really appreciate it.
My
Appreciate your
pleasure.
time and look forward to seeing what your wines coming up will be like. Can't wait to
Yeah.
taste more.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.